Welcome to the Toward a Healthy Built Environment Training for Health Professionals series. We're excited to be introducing Tom Lancaster, a senior planner at Metro Vancouver. His presentation is entitled From Urban to Rural Towards the Healthy Built Environment.
So briefly, my presentation is going to look at what it's not. So I always say we need to understand what the problem is before we come up with solutions to it, especially in planning, right? Like we always rush to solutions. You all understand healthy built environment and the social determinants of health and how the built form can affect human health, emotional, physical, etc. But planners really haven't done a good job communicating that linkage right to our decision makers, and that's where so much stuff happens. So I want to look at what it's not, the healthy built environment, maybe some examples of small town, what it is, what it could look like. And I just want to preface that by saying in BC we're really lucky. I've worked across the province as a planning consultant. There are so many small towns with really good bones. They've got old main streets, they've got old downtowns, and some of them are maybe going through a bit of a renaissance right now, but your job and my job, planners' jobs, are to reinvigorate those small towns with the healthy built environment through planning and development and assisting with resources. So I'll get into some of that stuff soon. I'm not going to spend much time on the local government planning opportunities because this is about the most dull topic in the world, but I'll show you a brief slide and just show you all the different ways that you can get involved. And I know that that's one of the recurring themes of all your sessions, so I'll fire something up there. You might have even seen this chart before. Some tools for engagement. I wanted to do a really quick exercise with everybody just to get your minds going. And I'm going to base that on some work that I did in Williams Lake, which is a really fun place to plan. And then some small town examples. So without further ado, we'll get into some bad monuments to sad logic, as I sometimes call these things. So we've got about 60, 70 years of car-oriented development across the world. British Columbia, relatively young province. We saw the vast majority of our growth since about 1950. And if everybody can think back to 1950, but anybody who was born to think back to 1950, it was the explosion of the automobile. It was post-war. There was a lot of money coming into North America, especially Canada, in the rebuilding efforts. And there was a lot of development that happened. And a lot of that development was, 100% of that development was oriented around cars. And so now we're left with some of those bad monuments to the sad logic of only developing around the single occupant vehicle as the way people move. So if you go to Europe and you go to other places in the world that are maybe 3, 4, 5, 6, 700 years old, as opposed to us in Canada, we're 135, 140 years old kind of thing, our patterns of urbanism are really, really new. And it's one of the things that we have to build ourselves out of now. So, car domination, what does it mean? Wow, we got huge roads, we can move at much faster speeds than we ever have before, and then all of a sudden we need places to put all those vehicles, so we need parking, roads, speeds, and parking. I'm not sure you can see these photos, should have blown them up like 3 or 4 times the size, but essentially what happens when you have access to vehicles, you separate all the uses. There's other reasons why we do that, but it's one of the things that happens. So you see commercial areas growing up just as commercial areas. Residential areas are just residential areas. Industrial areas are just industrial, and so on. As opposed to the idea of mixing all those things. We end up with a lot of what's called Greenfield Development. And Greenfield Development, this is a great photo, I love this one. It's like the roads just sort of end right at the field. And you're looking at it thinking, gee, I wonder where that road's going to go in the future. And they're not even pretending that it's a cul-de-sac. They're just waiting for the next ALR exclusion to continue that road and to continue that suburban form. And then you end up with something that looks like this, and residential development is essentially disconnected from everything. And so people are disconnected from everything. And so you look at some Greenfield developments. This is one of the slides I threw in at the October presentation, and it's out in Coquitlam, and it's the development on a mountainside. Well, you can't get much more Greenfield than that, but it ends up in this kind of urban form. So really quickly, you have large parking lots with single-use buildings. So you go there for one thing, when you're maybe 2, and you leave. You get your 600 rolls of toilet paper and maybe a hot dog and a thing at the Costco, and you're gone. This is a Vancouver example. Obviously, what you end up with is gridlock at the peak times of travel in the morning and the afternoon. But then you go out to some of the smaller towns across the province, and you see this pattern playing itself out everywhere you go. So this is on the side of a hill in the Okanagan, and it's a proposed lot subdivision, and you can see there's two cul-de-sacs right there, and there's no reason to be there other than just a nice big house on a chunk of land. But if you're going to get anywhere from that house, you need a car. There's no way you can service that with transit. And the more small town example, I used to give presentations called Anytown BC, and I've been all over the province looking at this stuff, and it's really fun because I know where that is, and probably some of you know where that is, but it could literally be anywhere in the province. Another shot of the Okanagan, we love waterside, we love lakeside, and so we build our single-family detached houses on the lakeside. But there's actually opportunities to canoe across there or to kayak to work in the morning, which some people in Vancouver do. But generally, what you're looking at is a cul-de-sac, a road built just for that house, and then now I get to look at other people who are doing other things. Essentially, this is agricultural land being taken over, hillsides being taken over, and what results is from that are those patterns of highway development that need to go out to places all across the province so that people can access services, products, jobs, all that kind of stuff. So this is great. I opened up this catalog when I was in Summerland, giving a workshop there and part of their planning process like 15 years ago. And I opened this catalog up, and it was a beautiful photo of what Summerland looked like at the time. It was a nice antique little store that I was in. And so I climbed up to that exact same spot on the hill when I took this photo, and this is like 10 years ago. And that's what it looks like, right? So it's not, oh my God, how dramatic. But you can see what happens. So I'll just go back to it really quickly. See the size of the road, see the other side of the road, and the whole thing was just agricultural land. It was places where people worked. And we're talking about rural planning and design right now. So switch your heads if you're in Vancouver to maybe sometime when you've been to the Okanagan and start picturing this. Really what's happened to shape development patterns across the province in our smaller towns is working lands, right? If you think about the last 130 years of how this province developed, and by the way, we are the fastest urbanizing province in Canada, which is funny because it seems like such a rural place, but it's not anymore. The patterns of development are really shaped around industry, logging, mining, agriculture, fishing, etc. And so now we fast forward to where we are right now, and well, primarily we are a housing and residential economy in BC now, which is totally bizarre. Although apparently we're moving to LNG. So the health impact, you all know this. Car dependency, I'm going to breeze through this stuff. So air pollution, traffic accidents, lack of housing options, that's the biggest one that I'm going to try to focus on. Limited transportation choice. Those two things go hand in hand. Loss of community identity and uniqueness, lack of access to services, and you end up with the physical health implications of that. The obesity, cardiovascular disease, although I would also blame obesity on the rise of craft beer. And maybe in my case, because I walk a lot. And then social isolation, which is an absolutely huge one as we get into an aging demographic in our province. People stuck to their single-family detached homes, like my mom saying, they'll carve me out feet first in a pine box and all that kind of stuff. So the principle behind rural application of healthy built environment, the very core of everything is keeping the town in the town and the country in the country. Okay, so what is that? The town and the country. So the town, the village, are the historical little main streets and downtowns that I referred to. I'll show you a couple pictures of. And then everything else around that should not be sprawling subdivision of residential. It just doesn't make any sense. The land is cheap, and there's lots of economic factors moving in that direction. And it's difficult for local councils to stand up and say, well, what we really do is we would love to have some more orchard land on the, or more functioning orchard land on the edge of town. But your subdivision application is going to bring in another 7 lots of taxation. So we're going to approve it. What they need to know are 2 things. One, the long-term cost of the subdivision does not pay for itself, the taxes from that subdivision. 2, well, there's about 10, but I focus on 2. One is the taxation not paying for itself. The second piece, and this is critical for you guys, is your role to say, you know what, that subdivision on the edge of town, it's going to result in more people driving, fewer people walking, and as a result of those things, greater car dependence in that town. So, what are some of our assets? Some of those village centers and main streets. I did a bunch of planning work in Caslow. Actually, I should have asked. I didn't know where that was. But you can see these old, amazing main streets. They got all the principles of the built environment that we love. They got nice big sidewalks. They got interesting things to see and do on the sides of the road. They got old buildings, and they got cheap rents. So you get mom and pop shops, and you get a really fun little place to go. And you see some people driving there, but really most people just walk there from the village. Anyone? Yeah, Summerlin? Anyone? Agassiz and the Soyuz. So good planning and design. What does it do? It puts people first, right? We are a bunch of people. We're not cars, we're people. Like what I used to say when I was doing development planning was inside every vehicle, there's at least one pedestrian struggling to get out. So that's what we do. In well-planned neighborhoods, well-designed communities, there's stuff to do. It's fun. You want to be there. You want to be out having a coffee or doing whatever with your friends, neighbors, maybe even meeting strangers. Crazy idea. They support local foods and jobs. They make safe places. They make interesting places. Fundamentally, if you plan and design well, you're going to create lots of opportunities for positive social interaction. Bumping into people, meeting your neighbors, but you didn't even mean to. So the principles, I'm going to go through these really quickly, but essentially, if you can look at the physical features, the design qualities, and how people react to those. The physical features, the urban design qualities, and how people react to those, and bring those into the planning process, you can start to form a really beautiful built environment. So what happens, we'll start with this. Very simple things, sidewalk widths. You gotta have a big enough sidewalk, or else, you're like walking sideways past a mom with a stroller. What you want is enough room to have everything happen at the same time without being jostled into the road. So we look at sidewalk widths and then buffers between the sidewalk and the road. And we did a walkabout last October, which was actually pretty fun. And we walked around and we said, how does this work? How does this not work? What are the problems? It's tough to do it inside a room with like 1 foot wide windows. But just picture what it's like. Put yourself walking down the street, or put yourself in a wheelchair rolling down the street, even better, which is this. We look at sidewalk widths that accommodate all the various mobility needs that people have, and will continue to have in a growing amount as we age into the next 15 years in this province, which you all know about, and I don't need to go into detail on. Sidewalk widths and buffers to the road, right? The road is that big nasty thing, and that's what prevents people from having a really fun time when they're walking around or rolling around. Street widths. What's the next thing? Well, building heights. What creates an urban realm where you want to be in it, as opposed to driving to the mall in the edge of town or whatever. This is a fun one. It's a really simple ratio between the width of the street and the height of the buildings. So we're getting a little into the details of design, but this is all stuff that I can just repeat at you over and over again, so that when you're meeting with your councils, or when you're meeting with citizens groups, or with planners to advocate for a healthy built environment, you're thinking, hey, planner or urban designer or developer or councillor, what does it look like on the road? What is it like for a person standing there? How tall is the building versus how wide is the road? If the road's 30 feet and the building is 200 feet, what's it going to feel like? Okay, so just start thinking about this kind of stuff when you're advocating for active transportation that comes out of the built environment. So tree canopies, what do trees do? Well, they do everything, actually. The fundamental basis of good urban design is you've got to have good street trees. And it provides a canopy, right? So if you look at not just having a tree that goes straight up like some of these out here, but the canopy effect, the enclosure that you get walking around when there's trees overhead. And you always look, and this is a fun one, because now you start to see the tricks of the trade. When you're in a good place that feels good to you in the summertime, or in the fall even, especially in Vancouver, look and see how high the first branches are. They should be about 12, 13 feet up off the ground, about 4.5 meters, kind of thing. And you'll start to peel this stuff away and say, you know what, this didn't happen by mistake. This is important, and it was well designed. Imageability. I threw in this photo of Silverton. I did some community planning in Silverton a little while ago. It's the smallest town in BC. And there's 187 people in the town. And like, if you would go there and do some planning work on the weekend, it would be 210, and people would be like, oh my God, there's a population explosion. But the imageability of a town or a village is so important, right? So the architecture plays a big role. It lets you know when you're walking around on the outside of the building, this one looks much like this, actually. It's a nice big cinder block wall. This is gross. But if you go to a place, and it's not that difficult to do. I've worked as an urban designer in an architecture firm. Doing good architecture is critical. It's not hard. Anyone? Yeah. So City of North Van threw a whole bunch of money at this building, and it's caused, catalyzed a massive change in the neighborhood, right? So if you can advocate also for your councils or your planning staff, say at budgeting time when you're thinking about doing a big reno on City Hall, and City Hall's falling apart, please don't put your City Hall like where Surrey's old City Hall was, out in literally the middle of nowhere. They took all that capital and they threw it into Surrey City Centre, and it again has catalyzed the redevelopment of that place. Different scale than in the village, but it works the same. The enclosure, what I mentioned before about the trees, but look also where you get that little canopy on this is a commercial street, you get that little canopy of the commercial first floor. So you can see it's about 10, 11 feet up. That canopy with the trees, and you can also see the banners that some small towns love to hang, and some downtowns like to hang them. Usually Business Improvement Association will do that, BIA. All that happens about 10 feet up off the deck. So unless you're like pro basketball player, if you're like me, you're walking around, that's you about 4 feet of space in your head, and that feels nice. Anything smaller than that starts to feel like freaked out. Anything bigger starts to feel like a bit of an auditorium, like where we are right now, which sometimes is nice, but when you're walking down the street, you like to feel safe and you like to feel enclosed-ish. Transparency. Again, the cinder block wall, not that effective at really engaging you when you're walking down the street. Transparency, as many windows as possible and as many doors as possible, leading into fun little places to go and do stuff. You can see that over and over again. Complexity, and like the smaller storefronts. Smaller the storefront, the better. This is a great thing about small towns, and medium-sized towns actually, is that when you break up a block, you don't, like in Vancouver, have to put 4 or 5 lots together called an assembly in order to make a development work. In a small town, you can make a small 20-foot wide, 22-foot wide development work really well on a main street. It doesn't have to be 6, 8, 12 stories. It can actually, if you're redeveloping a small town, it can be 2 or 3 stories. So there's lots of opportunities in small towns to do this. Probably as many or more than here. Break up the street as much as you possibly can. So you're asking your counselors and your planners, when they're doing a planning process or looking at a development application, it's like, how wide is this thing going to be? Is it 100 feet wide? If it's 100 feet wide and it's going to be exactly the same store for 100 feet, which in small towns that means semi-big box, it's going to be pretty boring. You're not going to want to walk past it. Break it up as much as you can. Have as many smaller shops, which actually has more people coming in and out of those doors than you would in a larger shop. Legibility, these are some of the design terms that you kind of dive into a little bit more, but legibility just means when you're standing in a place, do you know where you're going? And do you know what the place is for? If you've ever stood out at, say, like Clark at First, you're standing there, just picture what it's like. If you can imagine, you've probably never stood there in your life. You've probably never driven past it. But if you were silly enough to get out of your car and stand there, you would not know what is going on. There's no signage, there's no development that teaches you anything about where you're supposed to be or where you're supposed to go. I think there's like a gas station on the one corner, a wall on the other corner, and a drop on the northwest and a drop on the southwest. It's what the urban realm is teaching us about our interaction with it that is the key lesson. Legibility, I took this shot, I think, in the Czech Republic a couple of years ago, but it's very clear where you're supposed to go. The paving on that road is like, okay, I'm going to follow this road. The paving is different on the road, and it takes you right into this cool little commercial center. You got to make sure everything's a human scale. This is a big one. So human scale in small towns, like I said before, loads of opportunity. 2 or 3 stories right at the commercial edge, that's what feels good. Generally, people, when they're walking along the sidewalk, they're not going to look up and be like, oh, that's a 12-story tower. Beyond 4 stories, generally people are like, I don't know what it is. Just feel there's a building there. But if you do it, it's called a street wall. You do a 2 or 3 story street wall, you're much better off. This is a shot from Nanaimo. I love the downtown there. It's really cool. 2 stories all around. Some a little bit bigger, but the majority of the commercial area is 2 stories. Notice the narrow road. Narrow road, big fat sidewalk, although there's a lot of furniture on the sidewalk. But then 2-story commercial. It's great. Well, 1-story commercial with a little residential. It's awesome. And linkages. This is obviously Europe, but you understand that all the shops all along both sides are linked together. There's an arcade that drags you along. There's awning to awning, and then there's public art. Those are kind of things that if you take those principles and you apply them into small towns, again, this one's Summerlin, you can take the big lessons from Europe or Vancouver or Surrey or wherever and apply them in small towns by being coherent. So that was design. Really, how much time do I have? Am I done?
No, you got 45 minutes.
Okay, awesome. Okay. So good planning. You want a diverse mix of land uses. I'll go through these really quickly, but some of them are pretty obvious. Diverse mix of land uses. So you don't want the single-use place. You want a place where if you're going to drive there, you can drive, jump out. Maybe you go to the YMCA, maybe you go work out somewhere else, maybe you go to the library, but you can also grab a coffee with your buddies. And this is a fun one because in a lot of small towns, there's a great article just the other day in the Atlantic. I don't know if anyone reads that, but it's about, it was a challenge. It was find a really fun place to live that does not have either a craft brewery, a craft winery, or a craft distillery. You can't do it. I'm also a home brewer. Okay, back to work. You want compact, walkable neighborhoods. So when we say a diverse mix of land uses, it doesn't always mean that it's compact. Because sometimes you can have a diversity of land uses, but it's so big that you would drive to one place, drive to another, drive to another. Make it so that it's compact and walkable. And you do that through what's called nodes, neighborhood nodes. Right? So you don't just want sprawling commercial and sprawling residential all over the place, because it's not going to work. You need the density in the place to support the business, to support the walking, to support the cycling, all that stuff. So compact and walkable neighborhoods. This is a fun one. So these 2 locations, A and B, these are both to scale, exactly the same scale. And so if you took a linear distance between those 2, they're exactly the same distance apart. But if you had to walk from one to the other, the distances traveled is so much greater. And so we get in the car and do it because we're lazy. Anything beyond about 400 meters-ish, 500 meters at the most, people will jump into a car. There's science that shows. Transportation options. We talk about a mobility network. The mobility network in any place that we're designing and planning for is how we bike, walk, drive, take buses, all that stuff, how we move around. And you gotta look at the entire thing. Diversity of housing choices. So this is a funny one. This is a really old slide. And the more I look at it, the more I think this is where we need to focus ourselves. It's about transitioning through life, right? And a lot of the time now we move from town to town as we change jobs and all that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of people across the province who don't. They stay in the town they were born in, or they come back to the town they were born in. And if we provide housing options, which we don't in this wonderful region, if we provide the housing options that will keep people in a place, you can age gracefully in place over time. And so it's not the same throughout our lives. And everyone gets these slides, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
So take a look at that slide and just look at some of those forms. They're older forms, but really it's like this is the stuff that matters to us. Townhouse, row house, some single family detached, all that stuff, but the ground oriented stuff, even if it's small, people will gravitate towards it, especially families. As a principle, providing a range of densities. Right? So you don't want a place that's all high density, you don't want a place that's all low density, you want a mix of all those densities. Because the densities allow you opportunities to do different stuff. You want to redevelop existing areas. So when you're doing small town planning, you don't want to be continuously pushing out to the edge of town because that just leads to the definition is wrong. You want to be looking at redeveloping what's already there. So does everyone know what brownfields are? Brownfield development? So Greenfield is obvious, it's green, Brownfields, it's not as obvious, but it's like old industrial gas stations. Gas stations are fun because they're so contaminated. And if you can make that development work, you're really doing something well. Brownfields and gray fields. So gray fields are old, crappy strip malls. The favorite thing in the world to redevelop. Preserving open spaces. So find the natural assets in a place and design around those. And don't just draw a line around it, but look at connectivity to that open space, or to that park, or to that natural feature. Right? Bring people into it. Don't just wall it off. Protecting and enhancing agricultural lands in the rural areas, in British Columbia cannot focus on this enough. These are older stats. I tried to update them yesterday at about 2:30 in the morning. I guess that was today. But there's not a lot of information on the Agricultural Land Commission's website. But those figures there, the $2.9 billion a year in economic activity, those are about 2 years old. Now, with the drop in the cost of crude and drought in California and our dollar being so low, everyone knows what's going on, right? Like you go to a grocery store to buy a cauliflower and it's like $8. There's no reason that we cannot be more self-reliant on our agricultural sectors. You want to foster unique neighborhood identity. So these are really important things. It's that legibility thing. It's about creating a place that is different than everywhere else. So it's the opposite of any town BC. The any town BC thing that I used to lecture on is like, hey, look, there's a McDonald's and a Timmy Ho's and a car lot, and wow, this looks like anywhere. You want to create that place where people go once or twice and think, oh yeah, wow, I know exactly where this is. This is a meaningful place. Presenting a friendly face to the street, right? Not this cinder block thing, but you want some windows and doors, like we said before. And this was a fun one, and I'm about to get into our little workshop exercise thing about nurturing engaged citizens. And this is where the health practitioners, I think, can play the biggest role. I was over in North Vancouver, and we were doing our official community plan a bunch of years ago, 2010, 2011. And I was on staff, and we had a really good relationship with Vancouver Coastal Health and Claire over here did an awesome bang-up job working with us. And Heather Evans did a great job, and Brian O'Connor, who was the medical health officer at the time. Totally stand-up guy. He got up and he worked with us with the public, he worked with us with developers, and he did stuff with our council. And that is so powerful. I watched this thing happen in council where they're like, yeah, planners, please finish your speech. As soon as Dr. O'Connor walked in the room, poor guy walks up and that automatically commands attention. It's amazing. And that's the weight and the power that you guys have. You can come to council and all of a sudden, much more so than planners, you have legitimacy because of your roles in what you do in public health. So absolutely critical to get involved. But before you're speaking in front of council, you want to be working with engaged citizens. And how do you engage citizens in planning? This is super boring. Well, you do fun stuff. And so if you can work with your planning staff, because planners want to be fun, right? We do. We're not, but we most that's not true. Not all of us do. I know lots of board planners. But if you can have fun public process, you can get people involved in wonderful ways, right? So we do mapping exercises. We do neighborhood cleanup exercises. We get people involved. We always do it around food and drink, well, coffee. And we get people from all different ages, right? The worst thing you can do as a planner is hold a public meeting with a bunch of 70-year-olds. I'm sorry, I love 70-year-olds, my mom is one, but they are not the people who you're planning for. The old folks are not the people you're planning for. Because you're going to start realizing the impacts of your planning exercises 15, 20 years down the road, right? So we want to make sure that we have the assets in place to take care of the old folks in the neighborhoods. But we're looking at housing diversity for the future of where we're going. So if you have a public meeting and only 75-year-olds show up, you got to do something different. This is a fun one we did on How to Why. We tagged on to the fall fair. We had like 500 people show up. Almost the entire island was there. So what do we do? Oh, this is the boring stuff. I'm going to skip past this for now and get into some fun stuff. So tools for engagement. I would say you've got to make sure that you've got the 5 eyes. You've got to get people into the process. How do you do that? You got to make it interesting. It's got to be informing. People are not going to show up to a thing unless it's like a comedy show without content. It's got to be interesting. You got to bring some kind of, you got to be informing. There has to be information you're sharing. People have to be involved. They don't want to sit there like you guys right now and just be talked at, even though I'm not here talking at you. And people need to be inspired. So you need to be able to show them what it is they're doing and how they're contributing. It's got to be smart, and these are just fun little things that we've created along the way. But it's got to be smart. Your planning exercise needs to be smart. It's got to be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and fun. And this is stuff that the health practitioners are really good at. Okay, so now what we've done, and this is the part where you can put your pens down just for a sec. So we go out to small towns and we say we're going to come up with a visioning exercise, and we're going to come up with 3 options for what the future of development is going to look like in your small town. Anyone have a guess of where this is? You've never been in a helicopter over the southwest corner of Vernon before, looking at a digital image. What you can't, maybe you can see all the blue dots? Okay, so there's 3 different scenarios of future growth. So we look at the population projections over a 30, 40, 50-year time, and we say there's this many people coming to town, likely-ish, and we're going to develop 3 scenarios for how those people are going to be accommodated in this town. Scenario 1 is business as usual. So I think you can see all the blue dots, right? They're kind of spread out all over the place, and it reflects current zoning and it reflects current land use in policy. So we said we plot that out on a graph, and we say, on a map, and we say this is what it's going to look like. All those little blue dots indicate 1 unit of residential. We go into scenario 2, and I'll tell you in a second how we develop the scenarios. So we want to make that really clear and transparent about where these things are coming from. Scenario 2 looks at different planning principles. And we take these out to the public and we say, do you agree with these planning principles? How much do you agree with these planning principles? And please give each one of them a weight, like a weighting from 1 to 10. How important is this to you? And this is why I asked about, has anybody not read the, what's it called? The toolkit. Because there's lots of stuff in there that identifies the kinds of planning principles and design principles that you want in the built form. So I'll take you through one of those in just a sec. So scenario 2 is kind of, it's a hodgepodge. We're not going to go with sprawl. We're going to change things, but we're not going to go like hardcore on the sustainable, healthy built environment. Scenario 3, we show what it would be like if we did do that. You see all the little blue dots clustered into 4 major places? And those are around existing and future commercial nodes. So these are the mixed use little areas. How do we do this? And this is the exercise that I want to take you guys through. This is kind of fun. So we come up with our principles, and then we say to the public, and we do focus groups, and we do surveys, and we get people involved as much as we possibly can. We say, of all the planning principles that we've talked about so far, can you start ranking them and tell us where you want to see future growth happen? So remember, where you want to see future growth happen. And that's called a driver of development. Where do you want to drive development to? Not in a car. Where do you want to push development to go? The second thing we do is, what are the constraints? Where do you not want to see development happen? And this is the fun stuff, because you get a group like this, and actually you have lots of debates. And there's a gal here who came up to me, and she asked a question last time about wonderful Greenfield Development on the edge of town that gives access to green space and parks and all that stuff. And yeah, there she is right there. And we had a good talk afterwards. Right? So this is the kind of conversation in a room where people say, actually, you know what? I think that having some development out of the edge of town allows people to access the forest. So for the recreational aspects of that and the benefits that come along with that. But you have other people in the room saying, well, actually, you know what we really need is more development in downtown. So we want to have some rental over commercial in our downtown. We want to see small businesses thriving in the downtown. So we map the drivers, the things that are pushing us to develop in certain places, and we map the constraints. And then we combine all those things into all the mapping, and it comes up with Let's skip ahead. Come up with all the things in red. This is what it's like. All the things in red are where we're not going to develop. All the things in green are where we are going to develop. And the things in darker green are the priority areas. And this comes out as a result of what's called preference mapping. So people say, this is where I want development to happen, this is where I don't want development to happen. There's a lot of consensus building that has to happen before that. Because if you walk into a small town and say, hey, where do you guys want to develop? People will be like, oh, here's a town, and I want a truck, door 3. And that's the way it is, right? No, I'm being quite serious. So strategies for containing development and ensuring that we end up with a healthy built environment mean that we're going to use existing infrastructure or expanding it. And there's a lot of reasons why we do this. Only one of them being healthy built environment. We're going to use containment boundaries. And this is the contentious piece because landowners, developers, and oftentimes the buying public are looking for land way out in the middle of nowhere where they can buy a single family detached house and all that kind of stuff. Urban containment boundaries, we use the agricultural land reserve, forested land, green space, open spaces as a way to curtail growth. We have to make sure that we're looking at the impacts of sprawl that really are quantifiable, and this is where you guys come in. What the social, environmental, and health and physical health impacts are clear. So the planners, the public, and decision makers understand the implications of decision making. I've got so many slides showing you creative. Do I have another minute? Can I do 1 minute? 1 minute? Okay. You want to look at creative infill. So opportunities not to just build a big block of apartment, because that's not what everybody wants. We want creative infill. I'll show you a bunch of things. And to echo Claire's sentiment, location. Okay. Can you see these? Clustered development. Ways to look at building things so that people have access to some green space in their front, side, or backyards, and they're shared little tiny mini communities, right? These are fun little places for young families to be able to punt their kids at the front door and be sure that someone's going to watch them. The infill development comes in all different shapes and sizes. We got small lot subdivisions in Vernon, where you're taking a large lot, chopping it up, and putting houses relatively close to each other, but they're still single-family detached houses. You can do nice density this way. Then you can look at infilling the laneway side, and BC thrives around laneways, right? That's how our province was built. A lot of services go down them. There's no reason why we can't start to animate those with housing options. Brownfield development, there we go. So sample strategies. Large lot infill, and this is a great example there, like cottages in the woods kind of thing. So in areas that already exist on the periphery of town, if you can retrofit them with a little bit more density, you might be able to service them with a bus. As soon as you can service them with a bus, you get younger families, maybe lower socioeconomic standing, who start to move out to those places, and it catalyzes the potential for having services out there, right? And that's the slow change in the suburbs that we really want to see. It's called retrofitting suburbia. It's so critical. So this is a small town vision. We want to have these little blobs, little neighborhood nodes. It's got a bunch of small-scale commercial opportunities on the main floor and some rental or strata title housing up above. Because what we're really missing are like a lot of the long-term rental opportunities, and places like this give people an opportunity to live upstairs and just jump downstairs for a coffee or whatever else you might want to do there. Another option of duplex and cluster housing, and you can tuck this nicely into green and open space, existing forested lands, and just apply intelligent siting principles. So you don't just bulldoze the whole site. You could build within the existing tree canopy. Ground-oriented detached and semi-attached. These are all attached row houses, and they're fee simple, which means you can own title to the land underneath your feet and to the structure you're living in, which is different than the strata title. Sorry, Dennis. More examples of that thing I was talking about before, and you see these all across British Columbia. We need more of them, and this is the opportunity for redeveloping gas stations, dry cleaners, this really toxic environmental residue from years and years of those kind of uses. And you can do them at any scale. That's what I love. When you go across the province, you see these in small towns on the periphery, in the main arterials. You see them in downtowns, and they fit almost anywhere. That's Bowen Island, I think. And Main Street's, sorry again, Main Street's such a great opportunity in BC, and I think that's it. Okay.